BookTube, welcome back to my channel. In April, I read 10 books, and a few days ago, I posted a video that was a kind of soliloquy about the books that I read and what I thought about each one. So if you haven't watched that video yet, I recommend that you go and check it out. I'm going to link it down below. At the end of that video, I also did a section called book links, which was one of my favorite things to do each month. I find a common theme between each book that I've read with the book that I read before and the book that I read after. It's one of my favorite things to do, and a lot of you have told me that you like it. So today we're going to revisit that list of books that I read in April, and I'm going to recommend 2 books that are similar to each one of the books that I read. That will be a pretty long project. It would require me to talk about 30 books. So we're going to split up that list. And today I'm going to talk about the first 5 books that I read in April. And I'm going to give you some kind of a recommendation. So, and if you like this, you like this kind of video. So stay tuned for that. So the first book that I read in April was The Outcasts of Time by Mortimer. And it was about these adult brothers who were infected during the Black Plague in the 1300s, but they're given a gift of time where they're able to spread their last few days on Earth, visiting the subsequent centuries and seeing what impact they can make on the world. It was a fantasy read that gave commentary on religion and history and social issues and the evolving ideas of right and wrong that have fueled religious persecution throughout the ages. Remember the biblical story of Cain murdering his brother Abel when God accepted Abel's animal sacrifice and refused Cain's basket of fruit. The religious theme in Mortimer's book reminded me of Jim Crace's Harvest, in which a group of sharecroppers in the medieval English countryside felt morally justified to defend what they considered to be their God-given rights. Both of these books offered introspection on religious and social and historical and political issues in an allegory that was both satisfying to read but also even more delightful to deliberate. On a more superficial level though, this novel is also about brotherhood, and from the onset of Outcasts, we get to see these 2 brothers who, even though they started off with different interests, were able to come together and work together. They worked as stonemasons together. They went off to fight in the war for their country together, and they're on their way back home together when they get this gift to parade through the centuries together. Throughout the myriad of those experiences, we get to see these 2 individuals sacrifice a lot of themselves for the brotherhood. They risk their lives for each other, supporting each other. And it reminded me of the brotherhood that is represented in Ayobami Adebayo's Stay With Me. In this Nigerian novel, the relationship between Akin and his brother is not at the forefront of the story, but the innate bond between these 2 young men and the secrets they hold for each other and the way they sacrifice in order to support each other is enviable, even if it is disastrous for the other relationships in their lives. That's the kind of brotherly love and sacrifice that would have given that Genesis story of Cain and Abel a much different ending. The Cellar by Natasha Preston is about a 16-year-old girl who's kidnapped and held captive in a basement along with several other women who their abductors grooming to become his wives. And while Summer is having the worst summer of her life, her boyfriend Louis is having survivor's guilt, wrestling with the idea that he's to blame for what has happened to her and unable to rest until he figures out Summer's whereabouts. Louis's experience in this book reminds me of Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, in which the husband is suspected of having killed his missing wife, and so his entire future is dependent on him establishing her whereabouts. Now, I didn't like this book as much as I like this book, so these are kind of mismatched links, but that's what happens sometimes. One of the other themes that this book explored was this crazy man's attempt to build a family through whatever means necessary. The repulsion that I felt by reading about Colin kidnapping women to fall in love with them so that he can start a family with them reminded me of the bile that crept up in my throat when I was reading the Roanoke Girls by Engel last year. It detailed the incestuous relationships that resulted from the patriarch of a family deciding that he was best for the women in his life. I hated this book, so why do I still have it on my shelf? Because so many people said that they liked it. So who am I to stand in the way of books that other people enjoy? So if you like this book, you like this book. I didn't like either one of them, but if you do, I will hold it against you. The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro is another allegorical novel that explores religion and history by casting this older couple, Axel and Beatrice, in this medieval English countryside. And when they become unwilling to live with the diminished state in which they're in, their loss of memory and their loss of vision, they decide to go reunite with their son who left a long time ago. The story explores the right to end one's life when it's no longer the life that you want. And so it reminded me of JoJo Moyes Me Before You, in which Will, the former life enthusiast and extreme sportsman, is rendered a quadriplegic, and when he becomes overwhelmed by his failing health, the people who love him, even in this diminished state, don't want to let him go. And this sparked a very interesting debate and discussion about euthanasia and the right to end one's life. Ishiguro also tackled the relevant subject of immigration and the melting pot or lack thereof when conflicting cultures try to mix. In this book, he mentioned the coexistence of the Britons and the Saxons, the two groups that eventually merged to become the Anglo-Saxons, but not before a prolonged era of wars and raids, and the whispers of xenophobia that would have continued long after some level of peace had been achieved. This theme could probably be found in almost any book that tackles immigration, but I'm going to mention J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace here because it tackled the after effects of apartheid in South Africa from the perspective of the African whites who'd seen the injustice suffered by the blacks and who'd felt guilty enough about what had happened to kind of let these blacks now do anything that they wanted, kind of in some misguided attempt to atone for the sins of the father, literally. In The Narrow Road to the Deep North, Richard Flanagan detailed the horrors endured by Japanese soldiers who were captured during World War II and forced into slave labor by their Japanese captors. The novel goes into great detail about living a breath away from certain death through starvation or sickness, or the whims of a soldier or guard who thought that your head should be separated from your body. And in this horrific representation of the realities of war, I was reminded of the intensity of feeling described by Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning. In this one, Viktor Frankl was also an imprisoned doctor, except that he lived with the certainty of death by gas chamber through his Holocaustic experience. While this was a really great book, one of the misses was Flanagan's representation of romance. I feel like the author tried to use the two constants in life, love and war, to contrast and thereby emphasize each other. Another book that used an epic romantic story to distract from the carnage of human suffering was Blindness by Jose Saramago, in which the entire population has been struck with blindness and people are desperate to survive through any means necessary. However, in the middle of reading about this quest for survival, we're supposed to be convinced about this May-December romance happening between two individuals who've never seen each other. And so while they're greatly mismatched in terms of physical appearance, they can't see each other, so it doesn't matter what they look like, it doesn't matter to them, it doesn't matter to anyone else either. So we're supposed to be convinced that this is true love born in the heart and not in the face. I wasn't convinced that this epic love would last much longer than the final pages of this novel. So for both of these books, these epic romances were mere distractions in otherwise gritty but great novels. Circe is Madeline Miller's retelling of the Greek mythology of Circe, the daughter of the sun god Helios, and Perse, who's a nymph. Circe is a social recluse. Even in her own family, she doesn't have these strong bonds because she feels like she's an outcast. She's different from the other members of her family, but also different from everyone else that she knows. She gets her revenge, however, when her transformational powers are revealed, and she's able to perform sorcery, but really only to help herself, even though she's helping others in the process. Another retelling, this time a fairy tale adaptation, is Boy Snowbird by Helen Oyeyemi, which describes a young girl isolated in what should have been a place of refuge and being victimized by people who should be her protectors. In both of these books, we have girls who are rejected by their mothers and women who take out their self-hatred and self-flagellation on the girls that they're supposed to be raising up to become empowered women. It makes us cringe to give these women the maternal title. Circe also explores the idea of body image from the perspective of girlhood. Specifically, young girls were made to feel like their physical appearance could be some kind of a handicap that they need to overcome. This theme is also explored pretty powerfully by Toni Morrison in The Bluest Eye. We have this young character named Piccola who is desperate for blue eyes because she wants the kind of life that the people who she sees with blue eyes seem to have. Except that no one seems to tell her about the strength that is already within her dark eyes. And so that's it. Those are 5 of the books that I read in April and the 10 books that they reminded me of. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you enjoyed this video, want to see more like it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with another bookworm. So we'll talk in the comments, and until next time, happy reading. Bye.